Welcome to Pop Culture Maniacs' podcast. This week's discussion will be on the future of the MCU. The hosts today are Kieran Freemantle and Henagan, TV editor of Pop Culture Maniacs. Jean, how are you today?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing, Kieran?
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you. So let's go cracking with it. So obviously the MCU, I think, is a big turning point because Phase 3 has finished. They've obviously had one of the largest films ever made with Avengers Endgame, which has seen a lot of changes, and they still have big plans for both film and television. So we've got obviously looking to see what they've got planned ahead. They've got 8 films planned in some capacity, got 8 TV shows for Disney Plus, and something called Hellstorm, which I've never actually heard before. Obviously, with the MCU, you've got no more Iron Man, no more Captain America. Obviously, that's 2 of their big hitters. But obviously, as well with the MCU, they've got 2 new acquisitions because of the Fox merger. So, what do you think will be the future for the MCU in the medium, long term?
I think I've been thinking about this, particularly in light of the recent death of Chadwick Boseman as well, and how that's gonna throw a wrench into some of their plans for making Black Panther kind of the cornerstone of the new MCU universe. I think really what they're gonna have to do, and I'm not entirely sure this is their plan or this is where they're going with things, but what worked so well with the initial round of MCU films was that they took the time to set up these heroes and give us a couple films to figure out who they were, what their personalities were, before throwing them all together in the first Avengers and then building from there. What worries me a bit about the current trajectory of the next phase of the MCU is that we aren't seeing a ton of these introductory films. Kind of just with the ones that we have that we know have completed filming that have been delayed for COVID. Like the Black Widow film is a exciting film. It's something I've been looking forward to, but we already know a lot about Natasha, and frankly, spoiler for Endgame if you haven't watched it, Natasha's dead. So it's not like she's going to make an impact on the future of the MCU. And similarly with what's the newest one? Is it the Immortals or the Eternals? Eternal, yeah. It's an entire group of heroes, aliens, not quite sure exactly what it's about. But it's seems to read more like an Avengers-style team-up where you have a large group of people that the audience are going to have to quickly learn about and understand in order to appreciate the film. And I would feel a lot better about the future of the MCU if they had, a War Machine movie coming out, or, I guess we'll figure out what they're going to do with Black Panther down the line, if there's going to be Shuri taking the mantle, if there'll be a recast or whatnot. But just kind of having foundational films on the schedule instead of, Guardians of the Galaxy 3 or, Thor 4, which are great, and I'm excited for them, but I'm not entirely sure how much more, road we have left with those characters. So I'm a bit wary of what their overall goals are with the next phase of the MCU.
And I was going to say with films like, as you say, it could be with Black Panther 2, it could be a passing of the torch style sequel. With Thor Love and Thunder, they were able to bring Natalie Portman back, and obviously the big draw for her was that she was going to play for herself. She'll be worthy of that. I'm not going to dare try and pronounce it. I'm just going to call it the Hammer. She becomes, well, because in the comic books Jane Foster does become Thor there.
Yeah, I mean, my worry too with that, I mean, I'm excited to see Jane Foster become Thor in whatever capacity they go with it. But I mean, I've talked about it with some of my friends and family, just kind of we're excited because Taika Waititi is so innovative and he did such a great thing with the last Thor film, and we're excited to see what he does with this. But man, Jane was just such a dull character in the 2 films she was in, so I'm a bit wary that they can completely revamp the character and make her interesting enough, and make it something where it's not, Jane gets the hammer and suddenly she becomes interesting. I just worry they haven't done enough building of that character to warrant something as monumental as turning her into Thor.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. I think I'm still probably one of them. It's still got the familiarity factor though, which I think would give some reassurance, because with some of their upcoming films, like they've got Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, and I think unless you're a big comic book fan, you don't really know who he is. It's just, from what I gather, it's going to be quite a more martial arts centric film. It's got they've got the director of Short Term 12 directing, and it's going to have the Mandarin, which it was probably one of the more controversial decisions in the previous phases of Marvel's with Ben Kingsley. So they're actually doing a proper version of the Mandarin. But then obviously people have written Marvel off in the past, since no one would have thought Guardians of the Galaxy was going to be as big a hit as it was, since it's a comic book that most people don't even know before.
Yeah, I mean, and even with the first Iron Man, I mean, I certainly had no idea who Iron Man was when the first film came out. So they've proven that they can take, properties that aren't particularly beloved or don't have massive fan bases and turn them into something cool.
Yeah, I think it's then sort of going. I wouldn't say quite the Drex, but they're not. They're not exactly going fast forward with like a Fantastic Four film, which I think a lot of people would really want to see, because, well, we've seen how Fox has treated the property. Marvel Studios certainly couldn't do any worse.
No, I mean, I trust Kevin Feige and whomever he throws together to finally create a Fantastic Four that actually works.
Yeah. The other thing is, what would the big art be for this for the next phases of Marvel films? Because we got obviously, because with the previous phases you had the whole Infinity War arc with and getting the Infinity Stones, getting Thanos becoming the big bad that we all know and love. So obviously, I know they've got candidates like Galactus, Doctor Doom. I'm sure they've got. They go for a Secret Wars story, or Secret Wars, a Secret Wars storyline, which is, a big crossover with all Marvel characters defending the universe and all that.
I mean, yeah, I think the next massive team up is going to have to be after they've tried to integrate the X-Men and Fantastic Four, because I'm not entirely sure how many more times they can go to that well and throw everyone together for a big team up to save the galaxy. And I would assume that might be the last hurrah of kind of the big MCU, and presumably that's still several years down the road. But I think the next massive arc within the MCU is probably gonna have to integrate at least the X-Men, or at least a couple X-Men, if not as Fantastic Four as well. Because why leave the money on the table too when you've got it? So
the Marvel films have been described as sort of like the most expensive TV show ever made as well, because of the levels of connectivity between them. The whole long running arc that ran over 20 films roughly. It sort of operates more like a TV show, because you've got Kevin Feige as the big head, and there have been issues with certain directors have left Marvel films because of the lack of creative control they have.
Yeah, and I think it's done a couple things. Just that whole mindset. From the TV side of things, it's helped teach a lot of people who didn't quite understand how serialized television worked, how to watch serialized television and how to appreciate it. But we've seen what can happen when you don't have a unified vision or one person pulling the strings. And with the last Star Wars trilogy, it was pretty clear what happens when you don't have somebody in an office saying, no, this is just how it's got to be. We have to get these characters from point A to point B to point C within this film. You can do it however you want, but we have to do it. And I'm amazed constantly that they managed to pull off what they did over the course of all of those films. And that, one, Kevin Feige stayed with it and didn't leave, which would have been a disaster. And two, that they managed to get to the end and satisfy most of the audience, if not all of the audience, with what they did. And that in and of itself is just incredible.
With the Marvel films as well, they have been like, described as sort of like the perfect 3 out of 5 star films, because they have sort of, whilst they obviously got your big, you got obviously great films like Iron Man and Thor Ragnarok, the Avengers, most of the Avengers films, but then in the other side you got like something like a Captain Marvel or whatever, you know, perfectly safe film, but doesn't really revolutionize the genre or anything like that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's okay to have that occasional one that just doesn't really do much for you, but does what it has to do. And I mean, Captain Marvel, you know, was fine, but it did what it had to do, which is introduce the character who's going to be important down the line. And I mean, out of all those films, you only had one, maybe two, depending on your thoughts, that were just atrocious. And that's a pretty good average to have. You know, I'd rather watch a 3-star fine film if I'm going to get, 5 or 6 really, really good films out of an entire pack of 20 or so. And with that average, it's pretty impressive what they pulled off.
The other issues is Marvel planning on they are planning on a multiverse storyline. It's how they might incorporate it, because the 2 big projects we got are Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness and WandaVision. Obviously, I think within the superhero genre as a whole, there seems to be more moves towards multiverse storylines, because Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, obviously brilliant film, and DC are obviously making moves for their next Flash film being a multiverse story, and they've pretty much stated that the Batman is the Elseworld story.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by multiverses. I mean, yeah, Spider-Man Into the Multiverse was just sensational. I'm intrigued by these multiverse options. I mean, to be quite honest, Doctor Strange is one of my least favorite characters in the MCU. And, for a multitude of reasons, not least of which is just Benedict Cumberbatch, I just don't think was the right guy for it. And, Wanda and Vision are 2 of my other least favorite characters in the MCU, mostly because I just never did anything with them. And I understand they were hampered initially because of the X-Men connections with Wanda and not being able to say certain things or do certain things, which hopefully will open up a bit more now, and we'll get a bit more of that X-Men factor within the character. But, once you start opening multiverses over the course of, multiple films and multiple TV shows, it can get really, really confusing for people who, don't want to watch WandaVision. Will there be something there that might be crucial to another film that's coming out? The way they've been talking, it sounds like you're going to have to watch the TV shows to understand elements of the MCU, which is a bit troubling because of what happened with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. when they tried to do that. But I worry with multiverses that it might get a little too unwieldy as an overall story. If they're confining stories to specific multiverses, like if Doctor Strange's work within the multiverse is kind of stuck with Doctor Strange's stuff until he comes into a large group film, I'm less worried. But if we start having there be ripple effects to other films, other characters, then things could get a little dicey.
It does also raise the prospect of what if Marvel might do some more standalone films, because they do obviously have their own Elseworld style stories.
That would be really cool if they started doing some standalone work.
You can imagine, like, as the MCU as it is, they would never do a film like Logan, because that was completely off brand.
Yeah, but it was so good.
I know. I was going to say, but since you brought it up with the TV with the connectivity issue, it sort of remind me of a YouTuber, Council of Geeks. His name's Nathaniel. I don't know his surname, so apologise if he ever listens. He does pretty much says the same point as you did, that the TV shows aren't going to be fun if they're pretty much home, because it's going to feel like homework if you have to watch all the TV shows to understand what's going on in the films. And I personally, a lot of people who watch the TV shows, they're going to be big fans anyway, so they're probably going to like the references to the films. Not everyone who watches the films is going to watch all the TV shows, so it's going to cause a big problem if they do that. I think the only way it can really work is if it's like a really subtle reference to the TV show, like a name on a screen, or something that could said in passing, which great if you're a fan of the show, but that doesn't exactly you require lots of knowledge if you don't know the show.
Yeah, and I'm not against the idea of having some interconnectivity between the TV shows and the films, just kind of like that cameo fun Easter egg factor. Or maybe, a quick introduction of a character that might pop up in a film, that sort of thing. I'm somebody who watched all of the CWDC TV shows for a chunk of time. And it was really nice to just have stories that I knew weren't going to matter in the overall scheme of the DC cinematic universe once it was created. And it was nice to not have that pressure, to not have to be like, all right, so who's this guy and this guy and this guy? But on the flip side, you always have that comparison. Barry Allen on the CW, is he better than Barry Allen in the DC universe? That sort of thing. And so I feel like MCU is not going to, throw Iron Man onto a TV show or anything. But, I'd like to see some sort of connective tissue between TV shows and the MCU. But I definitely don't want, like, the early seasons of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. because it hampered that TV show and it didn't allow it to create characters that existed in and of themselves. But it also pressured people to watch it to understand what was coming in the next Thor film or what was going to happen in Avengers. And that just was exhausting to keep up with all that.
And thinking of the Netflix shows, they did try to bring a little bit of connectivity as well, such as, I remember like Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage all had some sort of references, and now they're sort of treated as the gingerhead stepchildren because Marvel likes to pretend they don't even exist.
Yeah, and that bums me out because, those early seasons of particularly Jessica Jones and Daredevil and Luke Cage, is the first half of Luke Cage, they were really good. They were strong shows. They understood their scope. And, they worked well within the MCU world that had already been created. And that's kind of the level I'm hoping for with the Disney Plus shows. I don't think we're going to get that. I think we're going to get, big swings, particularly with the Hawkeye series. I think that's going to be a big piece of the puzzle for introducing a new Hawkeye down the line. But, I'd like kind of things that fit within the universe but aren't dependent on the universe.
Well, a lot of these series are going to be fans going to expect big budgets, and obviously you've got big cast members already in them because you've got like Anthony Mackie, Sebastian Shaw, Elizabeth Olsen, Paul Bettany, all pretty big actors in their own right, and obviously Tom Hiddleston in the Loki show as well. So it's not going to be much in the way of small scale stories.
No, it's going to be big budgets, and I'm assuming short episode counts to make up for it. But yeah, I mean, I'd forgotten that Loki was even getting a TV show. That one I'm looking forward to. I think that'll be fun because I think they can do a lot with that they couldn't do with more normal, human-esque characters.
And there's also what properties Marvel might release in the future as well. I was thinking, admittedly, because I think you can guess from for our audience, that is, they can guess from my accent I am not American. I would absolutely love a Captain Britain film. I don't think it's very likely that'll happen though.
That would be fun.
Sort of like the sort of picture of being Captain America, sort of like dark alternative, willing to do the stuff that Captain America wouldn't.
I would be down for watching that movie.
Yeah. And the other aspect of it is obviously there's still rights issues involving Hulk and Spider-Man, because Universal still have a big say involving Hulk, hence why there's one of the reasons why there hasn't been another Hulk film since The Incredible Hulk, as well as the two Hulk films that have been not doing financially well. And obviously Marvel nearly lost Spider-Man because of their dispute with Sony.
Yeah, I'm thinking, once they lose full control of Spider-Man, that's gonna be a huge blow because of how well they've managed to completely update a character that has been seen so many times over the last 20 years or so. Hulk, on the other hand, I don't even know if there's a possibility to really create a solid Hulk film at this point. I think keeping him, as a supporting character, both in the Avengers and with Thor, or whomever he's hanging out with in the next film he's in, is probably the way to go, because it doesn't put so much weight on a character like Hulk, who's when he's Bruce Banner, he's super personable, easy to understand, easy to empathize with. But when he's Hulk, it's just a lot of smashing and a lot less character development. So I think they've got the right path with him now, and I think it's going to work out if they keep on that way.
Well, they've got Professor Hulk now, so you never know Hulk film with him.
True, very true.
I know this is going back as well, though, to a previous point, but as I say, a lot of big name directors have sort of walked away from Marvel films, I would say. So the MCU seems to be more of a training ground for, well, not training ground, but sort of they get more smaller indie directors, or maybe good good workman-like directors. Basically, they just see it as from their logic, do the film, get a bit of name recognition, and hopefully they can parlay that into making a project they actually want to do. Since obviously Marvel films have lost like Edgar Wright, Scott Derrickson from the Doctor Strange, Patty Jenkins from the fourth film, and obviously we all know how well Wonder Woman turned out. Just because when the MCU started, they were pretty ambitious. You had Jon Favreau, young hot director, Kenneth Branagh, doing Thor. Who would have thought that would have happened back in 2008? And Josh Whedon doing the Avengers.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see who they managed to scrounge up. I'm just looking at the list right now, and Sam Raimi's going to be directing Doctor Strange, and he's no stranger to comic book films. But then, we still got Taika Waititi doing the next Thor. I'm assuming that's probably going to be his last one, but it's still great. And then, they've managed to get a number of female directors, which they had in short supply in the early phases of the MCU, which is nice to see. But it'd be nice to see, a woman or a person of color getting one of the really big films. I mean, Thor, obviously, with Taika is a big film. But, the next Avengers team up, see if we can get somebody who's not, Joss Whedon to be involved, or the Russo brothers to be involved.
I would, obviously, we'll bring this up for our discussion later, but I would picture they would do that with an X-Men film, since obviously civil rights, racial discrimination tends to be a big theme of that franchise. So.
Yeah, as long as they don't do the Phoenix again and have that same guy try for a third time, because gosh, let's just put that one to bed.
I got a feeling he's not going to be coming back to the X-Men films. So yeah, so let's pause it here, and for our listeners, we'll be going on to part 2, where we'll be talking about the future of the X-Men within the MCU. So stay tuned.